Hello, and welcome to the Canticleer podcast, accompanying our recordings of the Psalms with conversations about the rich wisdom of the Psalter, the storied history of psalm chant, and the place of both in our congregations today. I'm Brittany Hurd, and I'm joined today by two dear friends of mine, Father David Hyman and Dr. Jonathan Ottaway. Welcome, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Dr. Jonathan Ottaway is a liturgical scholar and musician. He earned a PhD in liturgical studies from Duke University in 2022 and teaches as an adjunct professor in worship and church history for Duke University Course of Study Program, Asbury Theological Seminary, and World Mission University. He is currently writing a book on Pentecostal charismatic worship in the 24/7 worship movement. And he also brings his classical training from Cambridge, together with his Pentecostal upbringing, to serve as minister of music at Holy Trinity Anglican Church in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, where we often serve together on the music team. Father David Hyman is rector or senior minister of that same congregation. After a stint in computer software development, he earned his MDiv from Regent College in Vancouver, and has served as rector of Holy Trinity for over 10 years, since it was just a tiny church plant south of Chapel Hill proper. So I'm very thankful for you guys to be here today. This is a episode I've been really excited to talk about because as Ryan and I have moved up here to Michigan, we're at a very small Anglican recent church plant, and they've been kind of thinking about incorporating chant into the worship there on Sundays. So I thought it would be great to discuss how Holy Trinity there in Chapel Hill brought chant into the Sunday worship. So I guess by way of introduction, maybe Father David, you could tell us what role the Psalms play in a service of Holy Communion on a Sunday, maybe kind of how they're also sort of woven or situated throughout the Book of Common Prayer as well.
Yeah, thank you. The Psalms are, as Anglicans, it's interesting when you look at our prayer book in the prayer book tradition. I think it's safe to say the Psalter takes up the greatest amount of space in the prayer books. The entire Psalter has been included in the Anglican prayer book tradition since the very the first edition. There was a complete the complete inclusion of the Psalter going back to 1549. The Psalms show up in the daily offices, and there are various ways to include the Psalms. You can read the Psalms. There's a 30-day Psalter reading where you read the entire Psalter in 30 days, or there's one that's a little bit more staggered, and in terms of the daily office. And so Psalms have always been played a central role in the prayer book tradition. In terms of the Holy Eucharist, the Holy Communion service, I think what's really important to remember is, one is that the Psalms are the hymn book of Israel, and when you look at whether it's the daily office or you look at the communion rite, the Psalms are included there, but the Psalms are not another lesson of Scripture. And I think that's really important to remember. For example, in the communion liturgy, you have an Old Testament lesson, an epistle lesson, and you have a gospel. But then between the Old Testament and the epistle is included the possibility of reading or singing the psalm. And the psalm is considered it's a response to the reading of the Old Testament. It's almost like another hymn. It's almost like another piece of what we would typically do with music. I mean, I think especially depending on the tradition you come from, music is often sung as a response to God's word or response to a homiletical moment. And so it's I think the psalm is included there as a response in the Eucharistic rite, at least, as a response to the reading of the Old Testament, which is really appropriate because it's Israel's hymn book. and it
And
locates
it
us.
kind of bridges the two in a lot of
It
ways too,
does.
because the
Yeah,
Christians have
absolutely.
always taken the Psalms as our own and not just sort of part of the
Exactly.
Jewish scriptures, if you will.
It's
Yeah, yeah,
but it also locates us within Israel as a new Israel, right? So it's there as um, and I think an important connection for us. And so yeah, so I think that's maybe I came from a tradition before I came into Anglicanism 20 years ago, where the Psalms there really wasn't much of a place for the Psalms.
hmm
Um, I mean, I would say it was fairly common actually. Everyone knew the Lord, as a chaplain in hospital settings, everyone knew, you'd go in and someone's dying and you'd ask them, what would you like for me to read to use in terms of scripture? You'd almost always have the Lord is my shepherd,
hmm
23. But in terms of the worship life of the local, the local church, the Psalms had a very limited usage. But in Anglicanism, there's quite they're essential. They play a primary role in
yeah.
our worship. So
And on sort of to round out the discussion of service of Sunday worship, the psalm is always going to be there in prayer book worship. How do different sort of Anglican communions or congregations implement that? Is it always sung? Is it often
Mhm.
read? How do we do that oftentimes?
That's a good question. I mean, I would say that I would say that. So I'm coming out of the tradition of Anglican church planting within the ACNA, and I would say again, my experience has been in most of the church plants and churches, ACNA churches, or going even back to the Anglican mission in America that I was a part of. The Psalms, if they were used on Sunday mornings in the Eucharistic rite, if they were used, they would have most often been read by half verse.
Okay.
However, I think chanting the Psalms, singing them, is such a huge that it's a profoundly important contribution Anglicans have made to the hymnody of the church is the chanting of the Psalms, and so yeah, it's just a wonderful thing when you see churches, Anglican churches, embracing the chanting of Psalms. I think it really is unique and beautiful and wonderful, and I think it offers another a layer of encountering and entering into the verses of the Psalms. So to answer your question, I think I don't know. For example, in our diocese, the Diocese of Christ Our Hope, we do more often than not sing the Psalms, chant them. I don't know that I think we're probably in a minority actually. If I had to be
hmm
honest, I don't know that many churches in our diocese practice that.
Yeah. And before we shift to how Holy Trinity shifted towards chant, maybe Jonathan and David together, but we'll go to Jonathan first. Can you give us an idea of sort of the musical culture at Holy Trinity leading up to this change? Was it very robust? Is there a lot of musical skill and knowledge in the congregation that led you to maybe make this change?
Yeah. I mean, I think Holy Trinity has always been committed from before when I joined the church to singing a broad diversity of musical styles and hymnody. Um, when I came in, the church already had a very robust, large hymn base that was the congregation knew well, loved well,
Mm,
was a really a part of the heart language of the congregation. But we sing modern songs, we sing teze, traditional hymnody. We have a fair amount of music that has been composed for the church itself. So some of the settings of the Gloria or the Sanctus, these have been written by people in the church, and
mm,
they've stayed in the life of the church. Um, so really, at the heart of the musical culture, we're committed to singing a broad diversity of things. But at the heart there is that the music should always invite the congregation's participation. And the music should always have an eye as well to how we are shaping the faith of the congregation as well.
Great. So then how did switching to chant or adding in chant perhaps, where did that come? Where did it come from? And kind of how did you guys work that into the discussion of how to do Sunday worship?
Yeah. So I think uh, so before Jonathan was hired on as our music minister, what 6 7 years ago, Jonathan. Um,
Yeah.
um, so we planted. So Holy Trinity planted 12 13 years ago, and our very first kind of come and see service as a church plant, it was a Vesper service for Advent, during Advent, and we were, I mean, a small sort of um, hard scrap, gritty group of folks who felt led to plant this church. And very first service, we had someone who came highly recommended to lead us in music, and this person did the very best they could. I think they were an excellent guitar player, but a horrible vocalist, and uh, it was really painful. And I remember sitting there. This is our very first kind of offering, and for people to come and join Holy Trinity, this new church that we're seeking. We feel led to plant, and by God's grace, a gentleman, a physician, local physician named Todd Granger, and his wife Jill were there. Todd Granger, he's a friend of Canticleer, right? He's a
Yeah,
friend.
he was the first guest on our podcast. Yeah.
Okay, he's a friend of the podcast. Yeah, so Todd Granger and his wife were there and had been praying for a faithful, vibrant Anglican church to be planted in the area for almost 20 years. And he and his wife are both incredibly gifted musicians. And so after the very first service, when they came, they were walking out and we were making our greetings and farewells, and they stopped and said, "We'll take care of music from here on out." And considering how awful the music had been that night, it was such a glorious provision from the
Yeah.
Lord. So they jumped in, and Todd and Jill both came in with, I think, a really fulsome. I mean, just from a fulsome experience of leading traditional Anglican Episcopal worship, especially with hymns and that sort of thing. And so we started up, and we were plugging along, and things were going really well. And when I was in seminary at Regent College in Vancouver. I was a part of a parish, St. Helens, and there was a really lovely, really wonderful music ministry there. And we just chanted the Psalms every Sunday. And so I brought up at some point to Todd saying, "Hey, what do you think about chanting the Psalms?"
Hmm.
And he leapt at the opportunity and just said, yeah, let's give it a try. And so I would that really was just kind of coming out of my experience of being in an Anglican church that embraced the English the rich tradition of English hymnody. And so it informed my experience of worship as well as singing the Psalms as a part of worship. So that's kind of how I got introduced. And Todd um, really took it musically from there, and passed the baton to Jonathan, who has done some really amazing things with chanting the Psalms at Holy Trinity. So
Yeah, and I
Although it's
seem to
worth noting that
recall.
they fell out of use for a little while after
Yeah,
I joined the church. Um,
on purpose, Jonathan.
well, no, I think it was. Uh, it speaks more to my background that I come from a Pentecostal church. Um, so before coming to Holy Trinity, that had really been my realm of experience. Chanting the Psalms was just not really in my musical DNA. So it's really something that I've had to learn to do while being at Holy Trinity. And kind of David's led the way of kind of reintroducing Psalms after they had a little rest for a while. Uh,
How did you go about the introduction? Was it a sort of difficult change or shift for the congregation now? Because I believe this happened while I was kind of recovering from surgery and stuff, and I came back, and all of a sudden, Chant was at Holy Trinity. It was pretty fun.
that seems about right. Um, there are kind of two possible ways that you can really go about introducing chant. That one is a kind of instruction heavy approach to chanting. You'll get to the moment in the service and you'll tell the congregation what's happening, and you can point out all the notation, and here's where the words change, and this is how it works, and you can kind of take that approach. Or another approach is to just go ahead and do it, and see what happens. I think I seem to remember we kind of opted for a middle pathway between those two. I didn't really want to do a kind of very heavy instruction approach. Partly, our church already had some elements of liturgical chant in the calendar already. Our All Saints service, we use a litany for that service. There are other moments in the liturgical calendar where we already had chant. So this wasn't kind of like a completely new and foreign concept. We also are just blessed with a number of really good singers and chanters in the congregation. And that, in a lot of ways, helps to do a lot of the hand-holding that a congregation might otherwise need. You've got lots of people dispersed throughout the congregation who know what they're doing and can help lead the way for other people. And then thirdly, we kept things really simple. As you're aware, chant can be a wide variety of things, and you can have very complicated psalm chanting, or you can have very simple. We kept it about as simple as you could possibly do. And we picked a psalm tone and we stuck with it. And I think we did that for at least a few months while people were getting attuned to the practice. And then when we switched to other ones that, again, just very simple. I tried to find ones or write ones that, that the musical changes really are very sensible to the congregation, so that I can hear where the next note is meant to go. There's a recurring pattern. This is nice and straightforward. Ultimately, we wanted through chant to help people connect with the Psalms better. I think an instructional method is very helpful if you either want to do something complicated, change it up a lot, or you have an unfamiliar congregation. But taking a simpler approach can be helpful when it helps the chant to get out of the way, so that people aren't just thinking about the mechanics of, did I get the note change at the right place? Is the syllable stress correct? Or, am I doing this correct? No, you don't want people thinking about those things. You want them thinking about this as prayer, as praise. And so trying to help chant just do the simple thing of helping the congregation to connect with the psalm as a psalm.
Mm-hmm. Did you find there was any pushback at all, or any challenges that you weren't expecting, perhaps?
I didn't get much of the pushback. I mean, David might have fielded some more of the complaints than I did, but
I think with so I think what we've just named is two waves of introducing the Psalms, singing, chanting the Psalms at Holy Trinity. I would say in the first wave, when we were smaller and we were, still very much a church plant launching, I think there were more folks who were concerned about whether this would be an obstacle for people to the liturgy. And at Holy Trinity, at least, we took an approach that said the church, even a church plant, has some responsibility to actually instruct people and even disciple people in being able to sing the hymnody of the church. That it's part of what we've been given as Anglicans, in the same way that we are instructing people in how to use the prayer book tradition. And so there was some pushback initially, but I think it's really important to note, when we reintroduced the chanting of the Psalms when Jonathan came on, I don't think there was any pushback. I think even people who found it to be a little bit other or foreign, I think they over time came to appreciate the beauty of singing the Psalms. There are people, I would say, who probably would say that, okay, maybe it's not their favorite thing, but it's lovely, and they're glad that we do it. I would say that's probably where most folks have landed. But I can't say that anyone ever once came and just was like, "This is terrible. This is awful. Why are we doing this?" Um, so
They
yeah,
just left. No.
yeah, that's right. That's right.
Oh, do you have any advice maybe for if anybody, in other congregations were to introduce this? And I guess Jonathan touched on this a little bit with the how.
I think well, one, I would say as a church, if you make a strong commitment to whatever is going to form the liturgical life of your worship, like whatever your liturgy is going to be, commit to that, so there's
Mm,
stability there week in and week out. And within that, once you've so for us, that was um, committing unapologetically to prayer book worship. This is what we're doing. This is who we are as Anglicans. And within that stability and the structure of the liturgy, there was freedom to do different things, without a lot of concern. And so I would say commit to your overall liturgical worship structure. And then within that, if you are uh, if you're going to start singing the psalms, I think, Jonathan, I don't know about you, but I find that the most important thing for the congregation to feel comfortable with chanting the psalms is you have to have really, really strong vocalists.
mm,
Like the person leading the chanting has to know what they're doing, and I mean, there has to be a real assertiveness on that person's part to lead the liturgy, to lead that part of the liturgy. Um, I think in our context, it's having someone who, not just the volume, but just the clarity of purpose when they lead the chant, so that
yeah.
people who are uncertain of how to read and follow along with the we print the notes. I would say most people probably are unfamiliar with how to read those. But if someone is up front and they're leading and they're assertive and it's strong, people just something happens. People get kind of caught
Mm,
up in the rhythm and the pattern, and it seems to work well. I don't know what you'd say, Jonathan, but that would be my thing: is
yeah.
commit to a liturgical have some liturgical consistency that allows some flexibility. If you're introducing the psalms, chanting the psalms, make sure that whoever is leading, that vocalist, that cantor is really confident and is kind of unleashed, right, to lead.
Yeah. And I think cantering is it inhabits this sort of strange space because you're not performing,
That's right.
um, because you're not all up there all by yourself waiting for the applause of the congregation, or at least hopefully you're not. But
Right.
and you're also not, as oftentimes, if you're when you're within the congregation, you're kind of following along with the whole movement of the people as one voice. But when you're cantering, you have sort of one ear on the music, sort of how it's to be sung, and another ear on, okay, is the congregation getting this? So sometimes
Yeah.
you do have to kind of adapt just a little bit, but you have to also have, as you mentioned, Father David, that strength of a sort of a through line with what you're doing so that they can follow you and push it through.
You have to go at a pretty set pace. You know, it's slightly slower than you think it might be, and then also you really have to clearly mark out where does the note change so that you're like foregrounding that for the congregation. The Lord is my shepherd; I shall not want. So like there shouldn't be a mystery for the person in the congregation. It should just kind of feel natural that, hey, I'm following along with this. This feels like the place where the note changes.
Mm-hmm.
In addition, I'd probably say keeping things more simple than you would think that you would
Mm,
like to.
mm,
Um, I think as
mm,
David and I have continued to talk about this, reflect on this, adapt this. Um, Generally, my impulse is always towards let's do more. Let's have more tones. We could widen the expressive range of the psalms. We could do some fun things. This would be great. I really have to tamp down that impulse because while that may uh, be more satisfying for a musician, uh, having a good ear towards is this going to invite the congregation in more fully, or am I going to leave more people behind?
Mm.
So you have to stick with the same few psalm tones and probably do them for quite a while, longer than you think you might otherwise. It's good to have check-ins with people who are not, musicians, to see how does this feel for you? Because I have my own. I practice these things. I have very little sense of how well it's being taken up just internally. For me, it feels fine and comfortable, but that's no good indicator of how it's being received by somebody sitting at the back of the congregation who has, spent a few weeks at the church. So, finding ways to kind of have a good barometer for how is this being received? How is this helping? How do we adapt this in ways that will be helpful and participatory for the congregation?
Yeah, kind of remembering that you're not the norm, right?
Yes.
Well, I would echo that what you just said. I think because we're not. This is not a performance of a special piece of music, is it? It's not that. It's participatory. It's inviting the congregation in to sing this as a response together, and so I think that's really important. And at the same time, Jonathan, I would say that what would you say to this? Is I think that the simplicity and getting people comfortable with chanting the Psalms has opened up more opportunities to do more creative things with chanting the Psalms. I'm just mindful of what you've done with Advent and just different things that you've done that have gone really well with chanting the Psalms. What do you think about that?
What did you do with Advent?
So, over the last 2 years, what we've done in Advent is we've had a kind of a gradual song, kind of a prayer to help us prepare us to hear God's word. We sing a few verses before the Old Testament lesson. There's the particular song that we use has a really nice Advent verse at the end that really connects nicely to the gospel passage. It's a cry for Jesus to return that paves the way nicely. And then in between, I've written like a simple psalm tone to which we can sing the psalm that then bridges the gap. It matches the music of the song that we're singing the rest of the time, so that it all kind of works together as one seamless whole, and it holds the service of the word together. So in that, like, yes, we're still singing simplified Anglican chant. Like, it's still very straightforward. It's probably even more straightforward in Advent because it's almost only 4 notes that we're singing. Mm-hmm. But it does that, the kind of the structure around it helps draw it into a larger framework that makes the whole thing feel like a seamless whole. And I think that's really helped people to adopt the practice well. And really it also helps set the season of Advent as something unique and distinct.
Yeah. 30 years from now, you guys will be singing the whole service. You'll have Father David intoning the Sursum Corda. It'll be a whole thing.
Absolutely.
Good.
Getting the congregation comfortable with singing this psalm and chanting this psalm and allowed for, like, I think, I don't know about what you would say to this, Jonathan, but I think we're able to shift gears now in ways that aren't disruptive, that the congregation goes along with fairly easily when it comes to singing the psalm. Does that make sense? I mean, I don't think it's like, it's becoming the norm for us, and so because it has, that doesn't mean we do the same thing all the time. We have some. Our scope is pretty broad, actually. Which is fun.
Yeah. I used to refer to, especially when I first started attending there at Holy Trinity, that the music was a bit of a roller coaster because you'd get some chant, you'd get some very modern tunes and some classic Anglican hymnody, some Lutheran things thrown in there for fun. Like, it can be quite wild. It covers the whole scope of Christendom.
Always a Wesley hymn. I feel like most weeks we have something by Wesley.
Well,
I mean, you have
it's
to, right?
always fun to see how many different centuries you can represent on a given Sunday in
That's
your
right. It's the
music.
challenge.
You know, how many centuries can you include? So
Yeah, yeah. Well, that is great. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I have one last question, which is the one that I ask everybody. What psalm are you? What is your favorite psalm, or
mm,
one that you're enjoying right now, particularly? Could be a setting of a psalm, or just the text itself. Father David, you have.
mm, gosh, that's a good question. Um, yeah, I mean, I don't know, I don't have a really good reason for this, but Psalm 51 has been something I've been reflecting on. It came up in the daily office lectionary, and um, you know, just what a profound moment in David's life. And
Hmm.
um, you know, I think we can all relate to the need for God's mercy, and you know, I think it was right. It was Athanasius of Alexandria that most of the scriptures speak to us, but the Psalms speak for us, and
Mm,
I find that to be um, very true. And Psalm 51 is a, you know, classic. It's easy for me at least to locate myself
yeah,
within
that's
that.
one I return to a lot when I feel like there's something is off. Maybe there's some sort of unconfessed sin going on.
Mhm.
I just need to pray this one until I
Mhm.
figure it out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Jonathan?
Yeah, I was thinking. It's a psalm setting, and the really frustrating thing is I have no idea what the psalm setting is. But I heard it last summer. There's an app produced by the Church of England called the Daily Prayer app.
Mhm.
Mm.
That has their morning prayer in, and you can also listen to the service. And they sometimes include music from St. Martin's in the Field,
Oh,
and they had this setting of Psalm 27. And I wrote down the date because it was so good. It was July 30th last year.
okay.
Um, for the life of me, I have not been able to find out what this psalm setting is. But it stopped me in my tracks, and it was beautiful. It was very much, it was done by a choir, so it was a
Mm.
slightly more complicated setting. And the last few verses had this glorious descant part.
Ooh,
And for the life, I would love to know what it was. I've looked through hymnals,
yeah.
but unfortunately have not been able to find what this recording is.
Wonder if you
So
can like
that's
chase down the music director there or something and
I
see
have
if he can.
considered it. It was
Yeah,
good.
it was that good. I'm gonna bug this guy. Great. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me. This was a blast. Um, let's see. What do I usually say at the end of these things? Oh yes. So if you want more from Canticleer for less trouble, you can always like this video, subscribe to the channel on YouTube. Next month, as long as we can schedule around illnesses, as we had to do with this same recording, I will have Book of Common Prayer rock stars, Dr. Drew Nathaniel Keene and Samuel Bray, because they will have next month they have a book coming out as a guide to using the Book of Common Prayer. So we're going to discuss the role of the Psalter in the Book of Common Prayer. But until then, you can support me on patreon.com/Canticleer for as little as $3 a month. And until next month, keep singing. All right. Thank you guys so much. That was awesome, awesome, awesome. I had a very good time.
Great to
Yeah.
chat. Yeah, great to see you.
Yeah.
Great.
What was that?
I said we miss you. It's great to see you.
I
We
miss you
miss
guys
you.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When are you
Yeah.
coming back to sing?
To sing? I don't know. I was briefly there for a week over Christmas, but you know, things that makes things very busy, so I wasn't able to make it out to Chapel Hill. But maybe sometime here. I know Davenant is
Come
going
out
to be
at Holy
having
Week.
at Holy
Can I
Week. Oh,
recruit?
that
Can I
would be
recruit you
so
for Holy
awesome.
Week?
I'll have to talk to my husband now, but we'll see. I don't know what our Easter plans are, so
Great time to
yeah, I
visit
would
with
love
your family
to.
in North Carolina.
What was that?
I said it'll be a great time to visit your family in North Carolina.
That's true. It's what, mid-March or so this year?
It's March 31st is Easter this year.
Oh my goodness.
It's
Wow.
early. Yeah.
Okay.
March 31st is Easter Sunday.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah,
So
well,
before all the pollen starts dropping, so
Oh, before? Do you really think?
I don't know, I'm claiming it.
Okay. Is your
The
Pentecostal
gospel's
background?
coming
Yeah.
back. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
That's awesome.
The Lord has foretold it.
Sorry, I'm gonna hit the record button so that your guys'